I'm Joseph Jerome with DuckDuckGo, so I'm obviously here today to talk a little bit about search and the future thereof. Let's see how this works. All right. Okay, so I sort of view search as really a fundamental utility for how we navigate the internet. People might disagree with me about this, but I actually think that we take search for granted every day in terms of how many times we're using it to access information, seek advice. It's just sort of something that people sort of have think about as being in the background. But I'm here today to try and encourage all of you to recognize that we could be very well on the cusp of a revolution in how users expect to access information online. I'm not the only person saying this, and this is when I sort of breathlessly talk about how AI is going to change search. No less an authority than the CEO of Google has suggested in 2025 that search is going to change profoundly. OpenAI has launched a Search GPT. Perplexity is portraying itself as an answer engine. And yes, even DuckDuckGo has a variety of privacy-friendly AI search filters and search tools. But this actually is not a talk about artificial intelligence. Instead, this is a talk about the value of web indexes, and in particular, Google's index, and how increased access to web indexes and Google's web index will be very useful both to increase competition in search, but also increase access to information online. So an essential ingredient for all of the AI-based tools that folks are using these days, search tools, is real-time information from an index. If you aren't aware of how internet search works, all search engines are powered by an index of content that is crawled, sorted, organized, ranked, and then returned to people in response to their query. Just because now everyone is very excited about large language models and generative AI doesn't mean that this fundamental truth about search has changed. Instead, I would argue that these web indexes that have long powered search are going to be far, far more valuable as we move forward. If anything, they're actually going to help augment and sort of alleviate some of the limitations we're seeing in the knowledge base of AI. So indexes power search, but their role in AI, I think, is less appreciated. But what they can be useful for is to ground an LLM and to provide more up-to-date information. The reality is that most large language models in generative AI, they're only up-to-date as of the point that their model was trained upon. So you can go to ChatGPT right now and ask well, this is actually from Llama, that's Meta, but you can go to any sort of large language model and ask it, what is the President of the United States? And as of my knowledge cutoff in 2023, the President of the United States is Joe Biden. So how do we rectify this? And this is when I talk about something which is known as retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. These are terms that I think you're going to see increasingly in policy conversations, news reporting. But RAG combines the LLM's reasoning capabilities, the benefits of natural language processing, this conversational interface, with search's ability to fetch information. This has a number of key advantages. It helps keep information in an LLM up to date without having to retrain things. As a result, this means it's significantly less expensive than having to train another large language model. And the key benefit for users is that it helps reduce hallucinations and increase access to cited references. In other words, it helps address some of this buyer beware information and rhetoric that we get around LLMs. So I think there's an incredible moment in time right here for both innovation in search as well as a risk of lock-in and sort of anti-competitive behavior. Why is that? Well, there are only two really large web indexes that are licensable and accessible to the public, and those are operated by Google and Microsoft. The fact that we've got these two web indexes stands in sharp contrast to the fact that we have a whole bunch of LLMs that are available. This is from Together.ai. So we've got lots of differentiation in LLMs, but very few web indexes that all of these LLMs can leverage. This presents problems if you follow some of Google's anti-competitive behaviors, because it really gives Google a leg up in continuing and extending its search monopoly out of search and into AI. If you've been following this case, and we've got a headline here, one of the arguments is often that artificial intelligence is actually going to make competition among search, and clearly I have a biased vested interest here, irrelevant. AI is going to take everything over. That's where innovation is happening. But this misses the forest for the trees. Already you have Google offering through Gemini the ability to ground with Google search. So this is Google taking advantage of its web index and extending that into Gemini. What we're going to see, I think, in the future of competition in search and AI is going to be somebody who can combine AI tools with a traditional web index into a nice user interface that leverages all of these things. And I think that really is the future of search. Google's sheer size, I think, gives it a leg up here. But there's all sorts of evidence, anecdotal and academic, that Google's search results are declining in quality. There's a lot of reasons for this, but it doesn't mean that their underlying index has declined. Instead, I think the argument is often that Google has chosen to elevate, maximize, re-rank content to either maximize profits, boost engagement, but they've changed what's being elevated in search regardless of what their underlying index says. This has major implications for everybody. It also gives us an opportunity to create differentiated and unique search experiences. So we need to decouple Google's index from its search results. And fortunately, the Department of Justice has recommended just this, that we uncouple Google's index to remove barriers to entry, pry open monopolized markets, and deprive Google of the fruits of its monopoly. Unfortunately, when I start talking about the nuances of web indexes and retrieval augmented generation, that just isn't as sexy as things like breaking up Google. But it's clearly part and parcel on page 12 of 35 of the Department of Justice's proposal here. This sort of remedy, we talk about breaking up companies, this type of remedy doesn't punish Google so much as really give us the keys to unlocking competition in search. If any search company or AI startup, venture fund had access to Google's web index at marginal cost, they could prioritize privacy in their products. They could change design. They could have all sorts of unique UX, UI customizations that move far beyond our vision of search as type a little question into a box. So, in conclusion, I want folks to imagine a search engine that allows you to tweak the ranking algorithm. We're all sort of concerned about filter bubbles. Imagine a search engine that allows you to emphasize results in an era of increased surveillance or concern about government overreach that emphasizes privacy and security. Imagine a search engine that could elevate diverse and underrepresented views across the political spectrum. Imagine a search engine that prioritizes up-to-date news and information outside of a news vertical. Rather than being confined to our traditional filter bubbles that we don't understand how they operate, we could customize search to align with everybody's own unique values and priorities. Picture search that gives transparency into how all the results are ranked and ordered. We could open sort of the search black box and understand the logic of some of the ranking algorithms going on behind the scenes. That's actually real algorithmic accountability, I'd argue. I think it has tremendous ability to foster greater trust among users and really empower people to understand and make informed decisions about the information and content they're accessing online. So, as I'm going to wrap up here pretty quickly, I think we're potentially on the cusp of a search revolution. And this is not just about artificial intelligence. This is about access to indexes and other types of information. This is going to shape how we find information online. So we need to decouple Google's search index from its search results. This will unlock a whole bunch of products that DuckDuckGo can hardly envision, and I don't think any of us can envision. And I think that this will have a tremendous ability to empower users to access information online. Thank you.